This is my blue and gold macaw. We're away from home at the moment. This is her other cage. This was the first cage that I bought when I bought her many years ago. We had a medical emergency yesterday. She was downstairs in a kitchen chair, and these telemarketers kept calling and calling and calling. She got startled. She flew off the chair and broke her tail feather. Now this happened a while ago at the shore house. When the feathers break, there is feathers in your wings and the tail feathers. If they crack, they're going to bleed. So you have to remove that whole feather. It has to be completely pulled out. So if the feather's cracked, you got to pull it out completely. If parts of it's still in there, it'll just keep bleeding like a big pipe. And they do not have a lot of blood. So what happened is the feather busted, but it did come out. It was one of the little tail feathers in the bottom. And she was bleeding. She was dripping a lot of blood. So I grabbed her in a towel. That's how I do her nails. I grab her around in a towel, and I reach and I grab each foot, and then I cut her nails. And then I put, if they bleed, there's a little quick stop antiseptic stuff we put on, and that stops the bleeding. But this time what I did, because the first time it happened, I put that stuff on there. It did stop the bleeding, but I had to take it to the vet right away the next day to make sure she wasn't infected by putting that stuff on there. Well, this time what I did is I had to wrap her in a towel, put her on a table, and I took some of this hydrogen peroxide. This stuff is very good for yourself also. You got to cut, it bubbles. It bubbles itself and it takes all the infection out. So I washed her real good with this, bubbled it all out. The bleeding did stop. The feather was all the way out. And what I did is I put a little Vaseline on the hole. It did stop. You can also use cornstarch, some baking from flour, but cornstarch is pretty good too. So we didn't have any here. So I put a little bit of this Vaseline on there, and I did stop the bleeding. I looked at her today, and the cut is healing. It's not bleeding no more. Now what happens is, when those feathers break, that's in my book here. This book here, when I bought her, the woman that was running the pet shop insisted I bought this book. She wasn't going to sell me the bird unless I bought this book. Okay, it was 20 bucks for the book. This book was used many times, and this saved her life at the first time this happened a few years ago. Right here, first aid for bleeding feathers. Have the bird, handle her immediately, handle the bird gently. If a feather breaks, begins to bleed, it must always be pulled out completely from the follicle. So they do molt. They do change feathers. But what happens is the feather underneath pushes out the old feather. So that hole is always sealed. It doesn't bleed. So what you have to do is you got to completely pull that feather out with tweezers or needle nose pliers. Once the feather has been removed, blood may still come out by the follicle. If this occurs, apply direct pressure to the outside of the follicle, that's the hole, for 1 minute or 2 minutes using a gauze pad. Well, I used paper towels that were cleaned. And then watch it for an hour. to be sure the bleeding has stopped. And that's what we did. We got the bleeding in control. I stopped the bleeding. I put the Vaseline on it, but she really wasn't bleeding. And then I kept her close eye on her. The problem is that the vet didn't have no appointment here. There was emergency at 6 or 12 o'clock at night. 6 o'clock at night to 12 in the morning. What do you do in the meantime? Okay, you have to control the bleeding yourself. If you want to follow up on a vet, because I don't have a vet down in this area, there's one down in Atlantic City, which is an hour ride from here. That's where I bought her the first time. And it's a hot weather. You have to have somebody drive with you, especially if they're bleeding. The whole pressure, and you're going to drive an hour. She would have died yesterday. So, what you have to do is, anytime that ever happens, you have a parakeet, a little pet bird. You have to grab the bird and find out where the feather is and make sure it's completely pulled out. That hole will seal back up, and you clean it out good with some peroxide and stuff like that. But update on the patient, she's doing good, and that's what you have to do. So if you're not familiar, you'll go get one of these books. I don't know if they publish this anymore. I put a video out a long time ago about this book. But Bird Owners Health and Care Handbook. They must have a couple of copies out there. If you can find one of these, it tells you everything in here. You got emergencies, broken tail feathers. It tells you about poisons. A lot of stuff is poisonous. Like rhubarb is poisonous. Poinsettia plants. It tells you all here. Here's all the poisons. Common household poisons. Paint remover, paint thinner. Hairspray, that stuff the women use to bleach their hair, all of that. All of those cleaners and disinfectants and all that spray stuff is very toxic to their lungs. They don't have a big lung, but all of that stuff is bad. Super glue, weed killers, silver polish, rubbing alcohol, all that stuff is bad. See, rubbing alcohol. So you put rubbing alcohol on this bird, okay, that's poisonous. So this is a very good book. But I knew about the feathers. I know you how to take them out. Make sure they're completely out if they ever break. They're on their wings. They're on their tail feathers. And they hold blood. So if they ever break, make sure they're completely pulled out. I put some cornstarch to stop the bleeding. Make sure you clean it out good with peroxide. And if you want to follow up with a vet, then you take them to the vet. So I have to get a new vet down in this area. They're really not too good down here. I had some really bad reviews on the vets down here. And the other one is down in Atlantic City, which is like a big hospital. So a little update on the blue and gold. At a medical emergency yesterday, she busted her feather, from her tail feather came out, and the blood was coming out. So we had to fix it. She's doing very good today. She laid there, we had a towel wrapped around her, and I was putting the peroxide on, and she didn't fuss, because she knew she was injured, and I was helping her. So a little update on the blue and gold macaw.